Good morning. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our latest research on interaction of systemic copper with some different diseases, specifically HLB. Anytime you get together with a bunch of citrus growers, it kind of reminds me of these two young bulls that grew up together. They was put out to pasture. Later on that fall, they was brought back into the bull pasture, and they was comparing notes. And the first one says, "Man, life could not be any better." Says, "I was in some nice fertilized Pangola grass up to my belly, and I had 25 of the prettiest little heifers you ever seen for company." The other one says, "Well, I'm happy for you." Says, "I wound up stuck in an old dusty dry lot and very little shade, and the only company I had was an old steer, and all he wanted to talk about was that operation he had had." So, when our growers get together, it seems like there's a lot of tough stories we hear, and also hopefully today these guys will have something a little lighter and a little more optimistic, looking down the road. Natural Ag Solutions, Copper Quick, our story. I like to say it starts here. That's our story did start with canker. Basically, they say necessity is the mother of invention, and we was grasping at straws and looking for most anything. Come to find out, we had some success. We were able to get a patent on Copper Quick. This was issued back in 2013, so it is a unique product as such. What it's not a fungicide. It's not a topical copper product at all, in fact. What it is a highly soluble amino acid complex copper nutritional that's designed to supply systemic copper in the plant, basically nutritional copper. As such, it's more of a natural alternative to traditional copper fungicides. In designing, I've had a lot of experience with foliar fertilizers, and in designing any good foliar fertilizer, these characteristics here, if you start with good material, way a lot of people try to differentiate themselves is they add some magic molecule or some new chemistry to the same old thing, and typically that doesn't really pan out. So, but if you start with good soluble materials, it does make a difference. We also tried to optimize it for safety and for just practical use in the plant. By complexing it with amino acids, it does reduce phytotoxicity quite a bit, and it makes it more mobile, both moving in the plant and once it's inside the plant, it makes it more mobile. Copper is actually transported in a plant as an amino acid complex. Theory is one thing, but we actually have some trial results showing some of our success as far as getting copper in a plant. Dr. Raul Malaverapu this year did a trial. In this trial, what we done was we used 3 different sources of copper, but all the copper solutions that we used in the treatment had the same amount of elemental copper in the solutions. They just from different sources. As you can see, the copper in Copper Quick is about 4 times more soluble than that in Magnabond, which is a competitive product that's a sulfate-based material. You can see the post-treatment copper levels were 36% higher with our Copper Quick. How that translates in value to a grower is kind of like this. Magnabond contains 5% copper, weighs 9.9 pounds per gallon. That means it contains a half a pound of copper per gallon. Copper Quick, on the other hand, contains 12% copper, weighs 12.6 pounds per gallon, and has about a pound and a half, or about 3 times more copper per gallon than the Magnabond. This translates, if you're paying $96.50 a gallon for the Copper Quick, the value of the copper, well, based on just being a third as much copper, the value of Magnabond would be somewhere around $32 a gallon. When you factor in the efficiency of the Copper Quick, it's it would be valued at somewhere, the Magnabond would be somewhere around $23 a gallon, and it sells for about twice that. It also translates into a better product in the field. This is a trial that Dr. Graham did back in 2013. This particular slide shows total disease incidence, and as you can see, the control was 39%. There's Coside, there's Copperquick, both basically statistically the same. If you look at a copper sulfate-based product over here, the last two here are copper sulfate-based materials. They were basically statistically the same as the control, which means they really didn't do anything. I also thought it would be good for y'all to see that we've not only used this product just on citrus, but we've also had some other experience. This was a trial done by Monica Azores-Hampton down in the University of Florida in Immokalee. This is bacterial leaf spot on tomatoes disease incidence. As you can see, the control was almost 90%. The two best treatments that you'll see here was the Coside manzate combination and the Copperquick manzate combination. Statistically, there again, they were the same, but in actual numbers, the Copperquick manzate combination outperformed the Coside manzate slightly in both cases, both at a 4-ounce rate and an 8-ounce rate. How that's translated in the field, one of our larger growers is a fellow named Brad Smith from up in Moultrie, Georgia. And quoting him, he said that they basically sprayed about a third less material than they normally do, and this was the cleanest spring crop we've ever grown. This was his first experience with Copperquick. I think they grow about 400 acres up in Moultrie. When he says about a third less materials, that's the third less typical coppers and other more harsher materials that they use to control the bacterial leaf spot. This is a picture, and it was a absolutely beautiful field. You can see here the tomato plants are up to the tops of the stakes here. Typically, by the time tomatoes get to that level, you're going to see the old leaves look like a piece of rubber from having been sprayed so many times, and you'll see bacterial leaf spot. These were just as clean as a whistle, and it was not without a lot of disease pressure, because a lot of the other local growers did have significant issues. He also grew a fall crop just recently, and he said there wasn't any control on this last crop. The first one he'd left a control. We also had another trial up in North Florida at Quincy. We've had one, I showed you one on citrus, one on tomatoes. This one's on watermelons. These are all bacterial diseases, though. Of course, bacterial leaf spot is actually a real close cousin to canker, the same organism. In this case, I'm showing the plant mortality, or in layman's terms, percent dead plants. Literally, they lost a little over 27% of the plants in the control. Mancocide, which was kind of the grower standard, was at 4.5%. Copperquick was at 4.5%. So there again, we're statistically the same. When you look at the yields, there again, look very favorable. One thing that I fail to recognize here is that they were using manzate or mancocide, which is a combination there again of manzate and coside, which has proved to be very effective, probably the most effective way of controlling bacterial leaf spot and a lot of these bacterial diseases. And we failed to put the manzate with our Copperquick this time, but still we had very good results. So, and just building a case here, certainly we've got tomato trials, watermelon, citrus, all three bacterial diseases, three different crops, but we've had good success in a variety of circumstances. So, how does this apply to HLB? Well, HLB being a bacteria, we figured might be some possibilities there. And back in 2011, I think some of y'all probably remember Tim Spann was one of our speakers. And at that meeting, he told me of a trial that Jim Graham was doing where they had injected copper into tree trunks and was having some success in treating greening. So naturally, that got my attention. We decided we was going to try some things, and one of our first treatments was this little tree right here. We instead of doing a trunk injection, we just did a basal treatment. We literally painted about an ounce of copper quick on the trunk of this little tree. This is that same tree in July. Last fall, I took a shot of it. You can see I just took a picture up in the top of the tree. No dieback. It's kind of hard to tell, but had a pretty good crop on it. Still around. So we, it didn't take long to convince me. It's taken me a little longer to convince most of you guys, but I felt like this was something that we needed to pursue. Like I said, it was based on this trial done by Jim Graham. As you can see, it was published back in 2011 at the International Research Conference on HLB. His findings was this. Basically, he recognized the fact that it's a phloem-limited disease, canker or greening is, and that the typical topical copper fungicides wouldn't have any effect on it because the copper's not getting in the plant. Well, his approach was to simply drill a hole in the tree and inject the material into the trunk to ensure that the copper got in there. So that's what they did. I think the trial was done over about a 5-month period, and in summarizing, he said all copper treatments produced changes in canopy ratings that reflected a positive response compared to no change in the non-treated control trees. So the trees simply looked better. They also did PCR test at the end of the trial, and he said that CT values for the non-treated controls indicated positive HLB status, whereas CTs for copper-treated trees were significantly higher and indicated a negative or threshold bacterial infection. So in this trial, the trees that were treated with the copper were actually, according to the CT values and the PCR test had done, were actually free of the infection in some cases. So it was pretty significant results. The other thing that he did is they detached leaves from the tree, they carried them in a lab, they inoculated them with canker bacteria, and then just give it a little incubation period, and the results was that the canker lesions were reduced in leaves of copper treated versus non-treated control trees, confirming copper from the treatments was systemic in the tree. He used this literally to confirm that they had gotten canker in the tree because the trees were having less symptomatic of canker. So my approach has been saying, no, it's the other way around. Well, this proves that the systemic copper had a positive effect on both greening and canker. To follow up on that, this last year we enlisted the help of Dr. Henry Yantz. For y'all that don't know Henry, he's a private research scientist that's done a lot of work for a lot of the bigger companies, including he's done some work with contract work with University of Florida. We did a trial, and in the trial, basically the purpose was to demonstrate the effectiveness of a single 32 ounce per acre foliar application of copper quick on the HLB bacteria. We did a little preliminary work up front. As most of y'all know, our recommendation on rates with copper quick has been 8 to 12 ounces. In looking at Dr. Graham's work, however, I thought that we needed to slam as much in the plant basically as we could to see what kind of difference we could make. And so I did a little preliminary work using different rates and all, and I kind of settled on the 32 ounce rate. Now, I really haven't tried anything higher than that, but we kind of got the results that we was wanting. So that's what way we ended up doing the trial. We put out a single 32 ounce application. Dr. Yantz done 2 PCR tests in this trial. He did one prior to the treatment and then another one 7 weeks after the treatment. What he found was that the CT values increased in 19 out of 20 trees sampled with an average increase of 18.1%. They were 4 or 5 tree plots, and they had about an 18% increase in the CT values. For some of y'all that's maybe have seen some of the work that's been done with some of the antibiotics, actually these numbers are better than most of what we've seen there. So we felt pretty good about this. One of the things, this particular grove belongs to Ned Hancock, and it's over by Ona. And Ned pointed out that this first 5 tree plot here was right on the end of the row. The old edge effect had kind of taken place. Most of your sicker trees seems to be around the perimeter of our groves, and this held true in this example here as well, and that the pre-treatment CT values for these first 5 trees was lower than the average of the rest of the trees, but they had the highest percent increase, which I thought was significant. So what we have here basically is 2 trials. They are done by 2 very experienced, very reputable researchers. We had 2 delivery systems. One used a simple foliar application. The other one did the trunk injections. But both succeeded, obviously, in getting systemic copper in the plants. They had 2 different testing methods. Dr. Graham basically had a control and a treated area, and he had a single PCR test, whereas Dr. Yantz had basically 2 PCR tests before and after. They both come up with the same conclusion, that systemic copper consistently raises PCR test values and improves tree health. I'd leave you with 2 questions. One, does systemic copper play an essential role in plant life, enabling plants to better defend themselves against disease? I think with the evidence that we've seen on a number of different crops, number of different diseases, I think that easily the answer to that is yes. And does Copper Quick provide the safest, most efficient, most economical source of copper? There again, we've kind of got past the point of theory to we've actually have some data that indicates this is true. So we feel pretty good about that. I'll just throw up a quick example of a program that was very successful this last year. This program was actually done on the CE Cruise Grove out, their 10-mile grove. As you can see, the first application was done as a dormant spray basically in January. The reason for that was Dr. Graham had passed on some information to Andy Tuck that where they seen some good results with soluble coppers in treating fire blight on apples, which he said there's some similarities with that in PFD, and he thought there may be good chance that the Copper Quick could help with the PFD, which has been raising its ugly head last year or so. So in this trial, we actually started with a 12-ounce application early, another one in February, and then they backed off to 8 ounces and done a number of other sprays, a couple of oil sprays. Then they also done some supplemental canker sprays. The canker sprays, based on basically weather-related events. And they did include anywhere from 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of of Coside 2000 with those canker sprays. Bottom line is, though, the grove looks real good. They've had very little fruit drop. I don't know if any of you guys is in here has rode out there with us, but we had a number of growers rode out and looked at this grove in the last couple of months, and it's been pretty impressive. There's no PFD, no canker. The trees were healthy. They still have fruit on them. They have a lot of hamlins and some pineapple oranges, and the fruit's still on the tree. That's kind of a plus. Another thing that's significant is that Dr. Graham's canker trial is actually right in the center of this. It's about a 1,200 acre grove, and he's got 25 rows about a quarter mile long where they're doing their canker trials. The only place you can find canker in the grove is in the trial area. And the only thing that happens different there is they're using different coppers. In other words, it's not the grower standard. They're using different brands of copper and trying other things. So in building a case for Copper Quick, certainly better nutrition, healthier plants, and less disease is a plus. We've seen positive effects on canker greening and PFD. We've had some groves, basically side by side with nothing but a grass middle between them. One of them's covered up with PFD, the other one didn't. There's some groves out at Lake Letta that we could show you that we've been very happy with what we saw there. We also apply much less metallic copper. The copper that you put out over the course of the year is probably going to be less than a pound. And with a lot of the research, Dr. Graham's done a considerable amount of research that's showing that lower soil pHs is definitely an advantage when you're trying to grow citrus. Problem is, if it's an old piece of grapefruit land or something, you got 150 pounds of copper per acre, you can't do that. You can't manage your pH levels that low. So it basically ties your hands in some of the things that you could normally do. With Copper Quick, we're putting less than a pound of copper, and basically that goes in the tree and has very little effect on the soil, if any. It's also a systemic product that doesn't rely on perfect coverage. The reason canker spreads is because the wind and driving rains and the effects it has basically destroying the coverage that we have with our topical copper products, copper fungicides. It's also a great tank mix partner in that most of our pesticides that we're using actually perform better at lower pHs. If you look at a product like malathion at a pH of 7, the half-life on it is a matter of hours, where it's literally a matter of weeks if you put it out at a pH of 5. It literally wears off the tree before it breaks down. With a typical copper fungicide, we usually try to maintain pHs 6.5 or so, and there is a compromise there. If you've got a pH of 6.5, most of your pesticides aren't going to work as well. The fact that it's cheap isn't bad either. This program that I showed you that they did at the Cruise Grove probably cost around $50 an acre or so, and a lot of the other materials that you would normally be applying, in other words, it didn't the net costs weren't $50 because they put out considerably less other copper fungicides and other products. So it is a fairly inexpensive alternative. I always like to end with something kind of motivational. I look at this little old tree in there, and I see throw the Bible verse up there. It says, "Look at how the wildflowers grow. They do not work or make clothes for themselves. But I tell you that even King Solomon, with all of his wealth, didn't have clothes as beautiful as one of these flowers." And as we struggle to maintain tree health in these groves, you can look outside in nature where they literally have everything they need. This little tree here is a picture of perfect health and very little stress. Basically, where where that tree is able to mine everything that it needs. Where you've got a old grove that's been there for 40 years, and it's been a high-producing grove, and it literally mines things out of the soil, and there's shortages that we're probably not aware of. When those problems are fixed, it does make a considerable impact on tree health. So we have to remember that the key word here is essential. We call these essential nutrients, and without them, that plant will never, ever be healthy. So with that being said, we do thank you for your attention, and we'll pass the mic on to the next speaker.